Hi folks, Josh Wolfe with Wolfe Vintage Watches here. Welcome to my shop. Today on the bench I have a 1973 Hamilton Clermont. Let's get into it. Let's get this Clermont disassembled, starting with, of course, removing the strap and the case back. The weighted rotor is first to be removed from the movement. Then I can take out the crown and stem by first loosening the setting lever screw. The movement is held into the case just by case screws. Other case designs call for case clamps as well, but this one gets away with just these special screws. With a flip and a tap, the guts of the watch fall away from the case. Now I can get the handset removed by using a small piece of plastic to protect the dial while I pry them off with hand levers. Here I'm loosening the dial feet screws, which are securing the dial feet to the movement. With a little persuasion, I can lift the dial away from the movement, exposing the day and date indicators. Speaking of which, I'll snatch up the date indicator wheel. Holding the date indicator is the creatively named date indicator guard, which is held in place by two screws. With the guard out of the way, I can get at the date indicator. I'll just toss the dial rest aside. The calendar driving wheel is next on the hit list. And now I can turn my attention to the keyless works, beginning with the setting lever spring. You know what? I should get the date jumper and date jumper spring off the movement. Those are in the Disappearing Parts Hall of Fame, so I best secure them sooner rather than later. What was that? I'll just set this back here and pretend it didn't just teleport itself across the room. All kidding aside, that's a good example of just how quickly parts are flung from the movement and why they can end up clear across the room. I got lucky with that one. Must be all that clean living. Moving on. The hour wheel is removed. Okay, after all that drama, I'm now on to the keyless works. I'll just grab this yoke spring first to take all the pressure off the parts. Then I can snag the yoke and the setting wheel. The winding pinion and clutch wheel are plucked out right before I loosen the screw on the setting lever return spring. The canyon pinion guard, followed by the canyon pinion itself, are now removed. As is the minute wheel. As you may have noticed, there's a couple of unique parts on this caliber, but the canyon pinion with clam notch takes the cake. Alright, now we're on the watchmaker's side, where I'll start by loosening the setting lever completely. I'm removing the winding up wheel bolt here. This part holds the winding up wheel in place. The automatic works are contained in this little module. For me, it's easier to unscrew the screw that holds it together while it's still in the watch. I'll be working on disassembling it later. Holding the click out of the way, any remaining power in the mainspring is let down so I can unscrew and remove the ratchet wheel. The crown wheel is secured with a reverse threaded screw as usual. I lucked out again and the crown wheel ring didn't go too far. The lever for stop lever comes out, as does the click and click spring. Alrighty, now we can get both the barrel bridge and the train wheel bridge removed. To me, this always feels like a turning point when servicing a watch. Most of the little fiddly bits have been removed, and now it really feels like I'm opening the watch up. This is what the A Schild tech sheet calls the stop lever, but most people would know it as the hack. This part will just touch the balance wheel when setting the time to stop, or hack, the watch. I can now nab the escape wheel and the barrel. Now for the top balance jewel setting and endstone. They are held in place by a shock, which is carefully opened. I can then remove the setting and the endstone so I can clean them separately in a bit of one dip. I close up the shock to prevent any damage during the rest of the cleaning and reassembly process. That done, I can now remove the balance cock and the balance complete. Since I will be cleaning the top jewel setting separately, there is no need to remove the balance wheel from the balance cock. They will be cleaned in a one dip bath as well. I can now work on removing the pellet cock. And out comes the pallet. I'll go ahead and remove the case screws now as well. Now it's setting lever screw time. That sucker was stuck tight, so I made like an offensive lineman and pushed it through the hole. I'll tighten up the dial feet screws before putting everything in the ultrasonic machine, lest they shake loose. I'm using a case knife to pop the barrel open. Normally I'll just press the arbor against the steel plate, but I noticed a slight bulge in the barrel cap. I don't want to make it any worse, so out comes the case knife. After removing the barrel arbor, I work the mainspring free of the barrel using my thumbs. As received, this watch had a flat mineral glass crystal. I discussed with my client and we both agreed that a domed acrylic crystal would look much better. Here I'm removing the flat mineral glass crystal with a press. Okay, let's get the automatic device apart. With the screw holding the two halves together already removed, it's just a matter of working them apart. It's a pretty simple setup with just a stop click and a pawl winding wheel. The spring for the stop click is riveted to the lower automatic device bridge, so no need to worry about that. After a good thorough cleaning in the ultrasonic machine, time to get this beauty reassembled and ticking away at an insane 36,000 beats per hour. First up is getting the mainspring rewound. I use a set of vintage watch winders that might be older than I am. Come to think of it, the watches I work on are all older than me too. This is a pretty long mainspring, so I'm using the largest winder I have. Being an automatic, I'll add some braking grease to the inside of the barrel. This will let the mainspring slip when fully wound, but protect the barrel walls from damage. Here I'm pressing the mainspring into the barrel. Since it's a long mainspring, it's pretty tight inside the largest winder I have, so I need to reposition my hands to get enough leverage to pop it in. A little oil on the barrel arbor, and now I can work it back into the mainspring and barrel hole. A little more oil on the other side of the arbor, and I can now refit the barrel cap. Using my tweezers, I can squeeze the cap onto the barrel. Even though I cleaned the bottom balance jewel with the main plate in the ultrasonic machine, I'm going to remove it now and clean it by hand. Taking this jewel out is the exact same process as removing the top jewel setting. After a good cleaning and inspection, I'll re-oil the end stone. After placing a tiny mount of Mobius 9010 on the end stone, I'll place the setting on top of it. Now the whole assembly is placed back into the main plate and the shock is closed up. The first wheel to be reinstalled is the escape wheel. Then the driving gear for crown wheel, which is actually part of the winding and automatic works. The third wheel and the large driving wheel are up next. It can be a little touchy getting all the teeth to line up between these two wheels for me. Before reinstalling the sweep second wheel, I'll add a bit of oil to the extended pivot, which can then be inserted through the tube. Again, taking my time and making sure all the wheels are properly meshed with each other before moving on. Speaking of touchy, this train wheel bridge has 5 pivot holes that all need to line up at the same time before being able to screw it down. Before I bump something and have to start all over with the train wheel bridge, I'll secure it down with screws, checking for free movement as I do. The barrel is slid home. Compared to the train wheel bridge, getting the barrel bridge refitted is trivial. Now I can reinstall the hack or stop lever. There are a couple different designs of this lever for this movement, but I like this one best since the spring is part of the lever itself. Other setups use a separate spring. The lever for stop lever, and yes, that really is what it's called, engages the stop lever when the crown is pulled out to time setting mode. One end interacts with the stop lever, where the other end has a post that rides in a channel in the yoke. This is how movement is transferred through the crown all the way to the balance to hack the watch when setting the time. The click spring returns the click to a position that will prevent the ratchet wheel from spinning backwards and unwinding the watch. Here I'm using my tweezers to hold the click spring out of the way so I can install the click. Letting it down very carefully so I don't lose the spring, the click, or both, I can now secure everything back down with a screw. A little oil for the top barrel arbor and the ratchet wheel is placed back onto the movement. The crown wheel ring goes on, and I just noticed that there's a jewel that needs to be lubricated that will be covered by the crown wheel. I'll go ahead and lubricate all the jewels now, so I know that all of the lubrication is done on this side of the watch. Dang it. It's so much easier to get the crown wheel in without the ratchet wheel, so I'll backtrack a bit to get everything in place. There. Cripes. Some oil for the crown wheel, which is then secured with its gigantic reverse threaded screw. And the ratchet wheel screw is tightened down. And now for the pallet fork and the pallet cock. It's hard to see in this shot, but the pallet's pivot is lined up with the hole in the main plate, and then I wiggle it around to get the pivot to line up with the jewel in the pallet cock. I'll put a little wind in the mainspring so I can confirm that the pallet fork is indexing correctly. Looks like power is making its way through the entire train of wheels, which is good. The oscillating weight axle is what the oscillating weight will be attached to. Okay, my favorite part, getting the balance reinstalled. I just need to slide the balance into place. Wait, why can't I get the balance into the watch? Feels like something is blocking it. Ah yes, the hack. You can see it right there. Since the keyless works are not reassembled yet, the hack is in the hacking position, meaning the small brass post is just where I need the balance to go. I'll need to pause on reinstalling the balance and move on to the keyless work so I can move the hack out of the way. On the dial side now, I'll start by lubricating the jewels with my auto oilers. While lubricating pivots can absolutely be done by hand, the auto oilers are fast, accurate, and very convenient. Here I'm applying grease to the large driving wheel pivot and installing the Pinion pinion with clam notch. This Pinion pinion is held in place by a clip which provides a friction fit onto the pivot. Using a stake, I gently press the clip home. I'll partially screw the setting lever down. This is so I'll be able to push the stem into the watch later. The winding pinion and clutch wheel are lubricated, as is the stem. When the crown is in the first or winding position, the winding pinion here is engaged by the clutch. It can then turn the crown wheel to wind the watch. Here you can see how the setting lever moves as the crown and stem are pushed and pulled. I'll install the Pinion pinion now. This Pinion pinion is not friction fit. That duty is handled by the clamshell Pinion pinion. As with the click spring, this spring is held out of the way so I can seat the minute wheel properly without the risk of crushing the Pinion pinion teeth. Lubrication before installing the unlocking yoke lever here. This lever is actuated by the setting lever. The interface between these two parts is also lubricated. The setting lever return spring does exactly what you think it does. Provides power to return the setting lever back into a neutral position. The quick date function on this watch is not through rotating the crown, but by pushing the crown in. This return spring is what pushes the crown back out. Grease is added between the return spring and the setting lever. The setting wheel is engaged by the clutch wheel in time setting mode. It will rotate the clamshell Pinion pinion to advance the hour and minute wheels. The groove in the clutch wheel where the yoke rides is lubricated, as is the yoke post. You can see where the post from the lever for stop lever fits into the end of the yoke near the barrel. This is how the hack will be engaged when the crown is pulled out. I always think of this as the cloud spring, but if you want to get technical, the yoke spring is what holds the clutch into the winding pinion. Keeping all of these parts in place is the setting lever spring. It also indexes against a post on the setting lever, which creates the distinct positions of the crown. As always, grease is applied where there is metal-on-metal contact between moving parts. Cleaning up a bit after myself here. The Pinion pinion guard keeps the minute wheel and Pinion pinion in place. It's only secured with one screw at this point, and the other screw will be added later. The hour wheel, or double toothing hour wheel, is placed back onto the watch. The unlocking yoke for date indicator engages with the date indicator wheel when quick changing the date. The unlocking yoke spring provides the power to the unlocking yoke. This is what creates that satisfying snap when the date advances. I don't fully load up the spring at first. I'll secure it in place with a screw, then load the spring and fully tighten down the screw. The calendar driving wheel will keep the unlocking yoke in place as well as advance the date indicator at midnight. The date jumper and date jumper spring also engage with the date indicator. The jumper indexes the grooves on the date wheel and stop it in the correct position so the printing on the date wheel align with the date window on the dial. Holding the date jumper spring in place with a plastic pick, the date indicator wheel is installed. I'll move the date jumper out of the way so it can fully seat into the main plate. Not tempting fate, the date indicator guard is installed. This component not only holds the date indicator in place horizontally and vertically, but it also secures all of the spring-loaded parts. Here's how the quick-set date works. The crown is pushed in, the setting lever pushes the unlocking yoke lever, which pushes the unlocking yoke, which advances the date wheel. The day jumper and spring provides the snappiness and indexing of the day wheel. The automatic works can now be reassembled. The stop click spring is held out of the way so I can get the stop click seated in its pivot hole. Because the paw wheel arbor sits proud of the bridge, I'll set the assembly on a steel block to make room. With the paw wheel in place, I can now refit the upper bridge, making sure to line up the stop click and paw wheel pivots. The automatic device is held together by a single screw. The whole assembly is refit into the watch. The paw wheel engages with the driving gear for crown wheel. When hand winding, the paw wheel will spin freely. When the watch is being wound by the weighted rotor, the paw wheel rotates the driving gear, which rotates the crown wheel, ratchet wheel, and finally the barrel arbor, winding up the mainspring. The winding up wheel transfers power from the weighted rotor to the paw wheel. It is held in place by the winding up wheel bolt. Okay, finally, back to my favorite part. Let's see if this thing even runs. Yes. Now I can get the top jewels lubricated and installed back into the balance cock. As with the lower jewels, the shock is opened, the end stone is lubricated, and the setting is installed back into the watch before closing up the shock again. Time for the weighted rotor. This component spins on the axle and rotates the winding up wheel. As we saw, the paw wheel and stop click will ensure that the crown wheel is only rotated in the correct direction, even though the rotor is able to spin in both directions. Let's get a full wind in and take a listen. Yeah, that sounds about right. To get the dial on, I'll first loosen the dial feet screws. Then, moving the day jumper aside, I'll seat the day indicator. The dial rest holds the dial just above the day and date indicator wheels. A final cleanup to grab any schmutz and fuzzies from the indicators, and I can install the dial. With the dial firmly seated on the dial rest, I'll tighten down the dial feet screws, securing the dial to the movement. This dial was in amazing shape. My job at this point is to clean it up without pulling up any paint. Rotico is just the ticket. Time for the hands. First I'll find midnight by advancing the watch until the date clicks over. The hour hand is up first. It's aligned with the 12 o'clock marker and pressed onto the hour wheel with the hand press. Then the minute hand is aligned with the hour hand and is pressed onto the canyon pinion. The sweep second hand is pressed onto its pivot, and now I can double check the quick set date function again. Everything looking good, the time for casing this baby up is here. I remove the crown and stem and reinstall the case screws. The case screws basically have half a head. I screw them down as far as I can and then adjust them so they'll slide past the sides of the case. Reinserting the crown and stem aligns the movement and dial to the case. When I've confirmed the stem is seated properly, I then tighten the setting lever screw all the way. The case screws are backed out of the movement, creating pressure between the screw head and the case. The case back is screwed back on for now to keep any dust from falling in. Now let's address the crystal. You can see the mineral glass crystal really isn't usable even if my client wanted to. So into my stash of new old stock domed acrylic crystals I go and come up with the perfect one. Yeah, that's nice. Couple of puffs to blow away any dust and grime that may have accumulated over the decades. I need to use a crystal lift to squeeze the sides of the acrylic uniformly. This jig will position the teeth of the crystal lift properly along the sides of the crystal. As I tighten the handle of the lift, each of the teeth squeeze the crystal towards the center. It really doesn't take too much pressure. Now the crystal is fit into the watch. As the crystal lift is loosened, the sides of the acrylic crystal expand against the case, creating a very tight friction fit. Check out my website, wolfvintagewatches.com. To see other service and restoration videos, click this playlist, or head down a YouTube rabbit hole by clicking on this video. Either way, please consider subscribing and liking this video if you found it informative or entertaining. Be sure to leave your comments and questions below, and I'll do my best to respond. As always, thank you very much for watching. See you next time. Bye.